My brother hired a PI to expose me at Mom's birthday, but the truth left him speechless in front of everyone. I never thought my own brother would turn Mom's birthday into a courtroom. One minute we were sipping champagne and watching her smile under twinkling lights. The next, Ethan stood up, raised a glass, and said he'd uncovered the truth about me. He hired a private investigator. He brought evidence. He thought he'd humiliate me. But when the screen lit up with the real story, it wasn't me who was exposed. It was him, and in front of our entire family. Ethan went silent. I never thought a night that began with Lily's laughter and warm candlelight would end with an investigation file projected on a restaurant screen. The lakefront restaurant just outside Denver shimmered in early evening light. The glassy surface of Cherry Creek Lake reflected the soft golden glow from inside the venue, where wine glasses clinked and a live jazz trio played something nostalgic in the background. It was Mom's 60th birthday. Linda Jensen, a recently retired nurse with a sharp wit and a laugh that always made you feel at home. This wasn't just another dinner, it was a milestone celebration. Family had flown in, friends from her hospital days sat next to neighbors she'd known for decades. My dad, Frank, stoic as always in his charcoal blazer, sat at the head of the table. My cousin Patrick was weaving between tables with his camera. Ethan, my older brother, had flown in from Chicago with his wife Michelle, both dressed in that polished city sleek way that made them look like they'd just stepped out of a leadership seminar. I had arrived early to help the staff light the candles, fluff the centerpieces, and make sure Mom's seat had the perfect view of the lake. She didn't like extravagance, just thoughtful details, and for a while it felt right. Mom looked radiant in the navy blue dress I helped her pick last week. She was mid-story about a wild night shift back in '86, pre-MRI machines, pre-electronic charts, when she triaged an entire ER single-handedly. Everyone laughed. I refilled her glass content in the quiet pride of being the son she leaned on these days. Then Ethan stood up. Wine glass in hand, he raised it slightly and smiled the way people do before a speech. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," he said, "I'd like to say a few words about our mom." I leaned back in my chair, expecting the usual praise, maybe a joke about her stubbornness, something heartfelt. At first it was. Mom has always been the anchor of our family. Ethan began, his voice calm and measured. She taught us strength, loyalty, and the importance of recognizing when something or someone isn't what they seem. Something in my chest tightened. Ethan turned toward me. "Noah," he said, setting his glass down, "you've been keeping secrets for far too long. Tonight that ends. Tonight this family is going to see who you really are." The room fell completely still. Forks hovered midair. Mom's expression froze. I looked up at Ethan, my stomach twisting. Then from the side of the room, a man in a gray suit stepped forward. "I'm Edward Spencer," he announced. "Private investigator. Peak Investigations. We were hired to conduct a comprehensive inquiry into Mr. Noah Jensen's financial dealings, personal and professional." My ears rang. I didn't move. Mom turned toward me, eyebrows furrowed. "Noah," she whispered. "What is he talking about?" I didn't answer, because I had no idea. Ethan nodded toward the man like they were running a board meeting. "I didn't want this to become dramatic," he said. "I just want clarity, truth, for everyone in this room, especially for Mom." Edward placed a laptop onto the side table and connected it to the restaurant's projector. The screen at the front of the room lit up. Charts, account records, screenshots of emails. All of it formatted like a corporate fraud briefing. I stood slowly, heart pounding. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I had no idea what they'd twisted. Across the room, I caught sight of Natalie, my closest friend since college, and a practicing attorney picking up her phone with a sharp look on her face. She whispered something to Patrick. Her eyes found mine, and I saw the warning in them. Mom was still looking at me, confused, worried, silent. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I never thought I'd have to defend my own integrity in front of my mother, my family, on a night meant to celebrate her. And just before the first slide clicked onto the screen, I realized something with startling clarity. Tonight was never about Mom. It was about me, and the version of me my brother wanted everyone to see. Long before there were slides projected on restaurant walls and accusations disguised as tributes. There was just me and Ethan, two boys growing up on a quiet street in suburban Denver. We were only 4 years apart, but it often felt like we belonged to different worlds. Ethan had always been the golden child, tall, confident, athletic, the kind of kid teachers remembered and neighbors admired. He played shortstop on the middle school baseball team, ran for student council, won spelling bees and science fairs with the same precision he now applied to quarterly business forecasts. Our fridge door used to be covered in his achievements, ribbons, certificates, newspaper clippings from local tournaments. Dad especially adored him for it. Frank Jensen was never cruel, but he was clear in his expectations. A man should be competitive, he used to say. Aim high, win clean. And Ethan did. He was everything Dad valued in a son, driven, polished, ambitious. Then there was me. I was quieter, softer around the edges. I liked to draw little cityscapes or animals I imagined living in the backyard trees. I didn't care much for sports or grades, though I did well enough. I preferred helping Mom cook dinner or sitting beside her while she balanced the checkbook, asking questions about the world she saw from behind her nurse's station. If Ethan was the sun in our household, bright, visible, magnetic, I was the moon. Present but often unnoticed unless someone was paying attention. And thankfully, Mom noticed. Linda had a way of seeing things others missed. She never compared me to Ethan, not once. Instead, she'd let me talk about my drawings at the kitchen table while we made banana bread. On nights when Dad and Ethan were away at baseball practice or awards banquets, she and I would sit in the living room and watch old black and white films, sharing a blanket and laughing at lines we'd heard a dozen times. Those were the quiet moments that meant everything, the ones that shaped me. But for Ethan, I think they chipped away at something deeper. Back then, I didn't have the words for it. But now I know, even with all his accolades, some part of him feared I had something he didn't time with Mom that couldn't be framed, measured, or hung on a refrigerator. I remember one moment vividly. It was 4th grade for me, 8th for Ethan. I'd spent 2 weeks drawing a poster for a Denver Through the Decades project at school. Colored pencil ink, carefully labeled architecture and figures. I was proud of it. I'd left it on the dining room table the night before it was due. That morning it was gone. Ethan told me he'd knocked over his water bottle by accident, ruined it. He said he was sorry, and maybe he was, but the smirk he gave me when Mom wasn't looking, that told a different story. Things like that happened more than once. In high school, I created a small charity project for a local art supply drive. Ethan was a senior then, applying to colleges. He told our family over dinner about his idea for a community outreach project. Used the same language I had in my grant proposal. Dad beamed. Mom looked confused. I stayed quiet. What was the point of arguing with a star still? I didn't hate Ethan. Not then. Maybe I should have. But instead, I tried harder to make space for him, even if that meant disappearing a little. I told myself I didn't need the spotlight, that it was better to be steady, reliable, unnoticed. But the thing about living in someone's shadow is, eventually it starts to feel like your natural place, like you don't deserve the sun at all. I pulled myself back to the present as the restaurant lights dimmed slightly, the start of the presentation, I assumed. The glowing screen ahead of me felt a lot like a spotlight, only now for once I wasn't hiding in it. Across the table, Mom still hadn't spoken. Her hands were folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. And Ethan sat back down slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the screen like a man waiting for a verdict he thought he'd written. He didn't know, not yet, that the truth has a way of showing up in places you don't expect, even in the stories you try to rewrite. There are cuts you don't feel when they happen, not right away. Some wounds bleed quietly beneath the skin and you don't notice the ache until years later, when something brushes the wrong memory. The moment that changed everything for me came during my sophomore year of high school. I was 16. It was early spring, just warm enough to sketch outside. I'd spent a full month designing a community mural proposal for the city's annual Art for All campaign, an initiative supporting public artwork in underfunded neighborhoods. I was proud of it, a blend of local landmarks and portraits of residents woven into a timeline of Denver's history. I poured hours into the concept, used my own money to print the mock-ups, and even got a mentor from my art class to review it before submission. I left the folder on the dining table one evening, planning to scan it at school the next morning. By the time I got to it, it was gone. Ethan, then a senior home on spring break, claimed he'd borrowed it just to show a friend in business club, someone who knew someone in city council. I was confused, but I trusted him. He'd always found ways to move in rooms I didn't even know existed. 2 weeks later, Mom called me into the living room holding a flyer. "Look," she said, "they're featuring Ethan's art project at the Civic Center next month." I stared at it. It was my mural, slightly tweaked, but undeniably mine. He'd submitted it under his name. I confronted him that night. My voice shook, not with anger, but something worse, disbelief. "You stole it." He leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed, completely unfazed. "I presented it better. They wouldn't have taken it seriously from a sophomore. It's still your idea, technically." "Technically?" He smirked. "You can keep the drawings. I got the placement. Win-win." I told Mom, I told Dad. They didn't defend him, but they didn't do anything either. "Boys compete," Dad said, sipping his scotch. "It's part of growing up." Mom frowned but stayed quiet. "Maybe you two should work on one together next year," she offered. "Share the credit." "Share the credit?" I stopped entering competitions after that. What was the point when your wins are taken, or worse, dismissed long enough you stop showing up for the race? That wasn't the only time. There were smaller moments, whispered remarks at family dinners, jabs about how nonprofits are just hobbies with tax codes, snide comments masked as concern. "You're still doing that helping people thing, right? When are you getting a real job?" Every time I tried to explain the work I did helping veterans find stable housing, advocating for battered women in court, the conversation would drift back to Ethan's next promotion or his upcoming client trip to London. It wasn't that they didn't care. They just didn't know how to see value in something that didn't come with a title or a six-figure salary. Over time, I learned to go silent. I stopped talking about the woman who cried in my office after landing her first job in 6 years. Or the night I stayed at the shelter until 2 a.m. because a veteran had a breakdown and needed someone to talk him through the panic. Those things didn't fit neatly into dinner conversation. So I smiled. I nodded. I asked about Ethan's firm. I complimented his condo renovation photos on Instagram. I clapped when he gave Dad another whiskey set for Christmas, and I stopped expecting anyone to ask me what I wanted. Now, sitting at the far end of the table, watching my own name flash across a screen, Like I was some defendant in a courtroom, I felt that old ache rise again. Only this time I wasn't 16, and I wasn't going to disappear. I glanced at Mom. Her jaw was tight, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Dad looked mildly annoyed, not by the accusation, but by the disruption. And Ethan looked satisfied, like he'd finally put me in my place. But what he didn't understand, what he'd never understood, was that I never wanted a spotlight. I just wanted to be seen. 3 years ago, my mother lost $40,000 in an online investment scam. It was one of those too good to be true portfolios promising secure returns for retirees, complete with testimonials and a professional-looking website. She had been saving for a cruise for some home repairs, maybe even a trip to Paris someday. All of it gone in a few clicks. When she told me, she tried to smile through it. "Guess I got careless," she said, stirring her tea. "It happens." But I saw the crack in her voice. I saw how she avoided opening the mail that month, how she turned off the news when financial segments came on, how she kept saying I should have known better, as if being trusting was a sin. At the time, I had just been offered a full scholarship to pursue a master's degree in international development in London. It was the kind of opportunity people dream about, the kind of thing Dad might finally brag about. I never told them about it, not even Mom. I turned it down quietly, emailed the admissions office with a thanks but no thanks message, and told myself I'd apply again later. I didn't. Instead, I picked up extra consulting hours through the nonprofit. I took weekend shifts. I cut back on groceries, on hobbies, on everything that didn't have to do with helping Mom get back on her feet. She never asked. That was the thing. She would have told me not to worry. But I couldn't stand watching her carry shame for something that wasn't her fault. Over the course of 18 months, I redirected nearly all of my savings to cover her losses in pieces, in quiet deposits, in disguised house upgrades, and extra support she assumed it came from the non-profit. I paid for her legal consultations when we filed a case against the fraudulent investment company. And when we won a small partial settlement, I made sure she believed it was more than it really was. That year taught me a lot about what it means to love someone in sense. But something else happened in the wake of that. While sitting in support groups with other victims of financial scams, mostly women, mostly alone, I started seeing a pattern. Shame was universal, so was silence. These weren't just numbers on paper. They were people whose lives had been fractured, who no longer trusted themselves to make decisions. And it broke my heart. So I did something small. I started a pilot fund through the nonprofit I worked for, a grant offering emergency financial assistance and mental health referrals to women recovering from fraud, housing instability, or abuse. I named it after my mom, the Linda Foundation. She didn't know. Not then. I didn't make a speech. I didn't launch a press release or post about it on social media. I built a simple landing page, filed the paperwork, and got to work. I used my own money to seed the first round of microgrants. We helped 4 women in the first quarter, then 7, then 17. I'd visit Mom on weekends and listen to her talk about her book club or the new cafe that opened down the street, knowing that across the city someone else was sitting down to their first hot meal in days because of the fund named in her honor. It felt right, quiet, steady, the kind of good that didn't need an audience. I often wondered what Ethan would have done in my place. Would he have stayed? Would he have quietly canceled a scholarship without ever telling anyone? Would he have sat through hours of trauma testimony and spreadsheet reconciliations just to give someone a second chance? Maybe. Maybe not. But that was the difference between us. Ethan needed recognition. I just needed to know that someone I loved could breathe a little easier at night. Now back in the restaurant, I watched as Edward flipped through screen after screen, unknowingly surfacing all the things I had chosen not to share: bank transfers, work logs, donation records, legal invoices. They thought they were exposing something. They had no idea what they were showing. This wasn't a fraud, it was my life's most honest work laid bare without context. My mother looked at the screen, then at me. And I suddenly felt something I hadn't in a long time: fear. Not of being caught, but of being misunderstood. Because when you live quietly for long enough, the truth starts to sound like a lie to those who never cared to ask. After Mom retired, something shifted. Without 12-hour shifts at the hospital or piles of patient charts to manage, she had time, real time, for the first time in decades. She started baking again, gardening, volunteering at the community center twice a week. And on most days, I was the one picking her up, helping her carry bags, or just sitting on her porch talking over coffee while the sun set over the neighbor's roofline. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I lived nearby, had the flexibility with my nonprofit hours, and truthfully, I liked the routine. After all the years she spent taking care of everyone else, it felt good to just show up for her in small, unceremonious ways. But the more time we spent together, the more it seemed to bother Ethan. At first, it was subtle. He'd comment in our family group text, "Looks like Noah's mom's new full-time chauffeur," or "Careful, bro, at this rate you'll be inheriting the garden hose and the whole porch." Jokes, I thought, probably harmless. But then came Thanksgiving. That year, Ethan and Michelle flew in a day early and stayed at a downtown hotel, saying they didn't want to impose. Mom had asked him to stay at the house like old times, but he'd politely declined. Dinner was cozy as always. Mom made her famous rosemary turkey, and I handled the mashed sweet potatoes. Patrick brought wine, and we lit a few candles. The table was full, the house warm with the kind of nostalgia you don't notice until it's gone. Then, sometime between the second round of pie and a conversation about how the neighborhood had changed, Ethan put his fork down and said with a sideways smile, "Well, if this keeps up, the house will go to you, Noah." The room went quiet. Mom blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Ethan shrugged too casually. "I mean, you're the one here all the time. Driving her around, taking care of things. Makes sense, right?" My chest tightened. Dad raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Patrick awkwardly refilled his glass. "And Mom?" Her smile faltered for the first time that evening. I looked at Ethan and forced a light laugh. "It's not about any of that, man. I'm just here." He nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't match the gesture. "Sure, of course." Mom excused herself soon after to wash dishes, even though we all knew she hated doing it on holidays. I followed her into the kitchen. She didn't say much, just rinsed, dried, and kept her back to me more than usual. "Mom," I said quietly, "you know that's not what this is, right?" She paused, the dish towel in her hands. "I know," she said, "but it still stings to hear." She wasn't angry, she was hurt, and that hurt ran deeper than just a dinner comment. After that night, Ethan called less often. When he did, his tone was cooler, shorter. I'd try to update him about how Mom was doing a new physical therapy routine, a book she loved. And he'd cut in with, "She's lucky to have you nearby," like it was an accusation, not a compliment. 3 weeks later, I got a weird feeling walking out of the nonprofit office. A car was parked across the street, the same silver sedan I'd seen 2 or 3 times that week. No plates I recognized. No one got out. The next day, an anonymous email landed in our organization's inbox questioning the legitimacy of some of our recent grant distributions. It was vague, full of passive phrases like "allegations have surfaced and certain board members are concerned." No sender, no signature. 2 more days passed before I found a business card tucked under my windshield. Edward Spencer, Peak Investigations. No phone number, just a scannable QR code. My stomach turned. I called Natalie that night. When I told her about the card, her voice went flat. Noah, I didn't want to tell you unless I had proof. But I heard something from a colleague at a law event in Chicago. What Ethan hired a private firm, a real one, with a reputation. He thinks you're manipulating your mom for, I don't know, inheritance, sympathy, something. I didn't speak, because I wasn't surprised. Somewhere deep down I'd felt it brewing in the awkward silences, the offhand jokes, the way he watched me at the last 2 family dinners. Ethan wasn't just jealous anymore. He was looking for a reason to believe the worst. And the worst part, he didn't ask. He didn't call. He didn't sit down and say, hey, I need to understand. He hired strangers to dig through my life like I was a suspect in a crime I didn't know existed. And maybe in his eyes I was. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of silence. One of our foundation's most loyal donors, a retired Army colonel who had supported us since the beginning, suddenly pulled out. No explanation, just a short email from his assistant. Given recent concerns about governance integrity, Mr. O'Hara has decided to withhold future contributions until further notice. I reread it 3 times thinking it was a mistake. Concerns about me. I forwarded it to our director, Lisa, and she called within 5 minutes. Did something happen that I don't know about? She asked, voice tight. Not that I'm aware of. She paused. Noah, I'm not accusing you of anything, but this is the second donor who's gone quiet in 2 weeks. Something's going on. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I'll look into it. That same afternoon, I logged into our shared grant account and found 2 outgoing messages in my sent folder that I didn't recognize. They were short, vague, and oddly worded, sent to private donor addresses. One of them hinted that our board was delaying audits and that internal reallocations were pending. I'd never written either of them. My hands started shaking as I scrolled down to see headers, timestamps, IP data. The login had happened while I was off-site attending a housing coalition meeting. I could prove it. But that didn't make it less terrifying. Someone had accessed my email. Someone was using my identity to plant doubts. I called Natalie. Within hours, she was at my apartment, laptop in hand, her expression somewhere between focused and furious. They were clever, she muttered, scanning my email activity log. Whoever spoofed this didn't just guess your password. They exploited a credential leak, probably from that fundraising platform you linked 6 months ago. I ran my hands over my face. So what now? Do we go to the police, the board? Not yet, she said. Let me dig. She tapped, clicked, scrolled. It didn't take her long. Later that night, she looked up, her eyes dark. Do you remember when you helped your mom file a claim against that scam investment firm, the one that took her savings? Yeah, I said slowly. I collected bank statements for her, helped write up the incident report. Natalie nodded. Well, Edward, the PI Ethan hired, managed to obtain some of that case data. I don't know how, but I suspect Ethan either requested it directly from your mom's lawyer or somehow got a copy through shared contacts. My stomach turned. Why would that matter now? She took a deep breath. Because the emails you sent on your mom's behalf used your non-profit address. That, combined with the financial documents you attached, could, if deliberately taken out of context, look like you were personally involved in a fraudulent scheme. You're kidding. I wish I was. I sank into the couch. So they think I was part of the scam? No, she said carefully. But if someone was trying to frame you, it's not hard to spin the story. An employee of a nonprofit misusing institutional resources to protect a personal legal case involving financial misconduct. It sounds damning, especially to someone like Ethan, someone who's already looking for confirmation of what he wants to believe. I exhaled slowly. So this is what he's using. It fits. Combine those cherry-picked emails, the fake donor concerns, and a handful of shady-looking slides. That's enough for a public accusation. Enough to embarrass you, to humiliate you in front of your family. And Mom. Especially her. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and triage. We shut down my account temporarily. The nonprofit's tech team launched an internal security audit. Natalie drafted a statement preemptively in case any donors approached the board directly. I didn't sleep much. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another bomb to drop. But nothing compared to the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Ethan hadn't misinterpreted the data. He had weaponized it. He took something real, the emails I sent for Mom, the financials I helped gather, and twisted it into a narrative of deceit. He wasn't confused. He was committed. I couldn't help but replay his voice from Thanksgiving. At this rate, the house will go to you. This wasn't about fraud. It was about fear. About losing something he thought was his by default affection approval control. And now he was going to stand in front of our mother, our family, and declare war using a folder of distorted evidence. He wanted a reckoning, but he forgot that truth has a quiet strength of its own. And unlike him, I had nothing to hide, only everything to lose. Back at the restaurant, the mood had shifted. The warmth from earlier had drained out of the room. What remained was a tight, quiet tension, the kind that settles in before something breaks. All eyes were on the projection screen where the first slide sat waiting in digital silence. Summary of findings. Noah Jensen, Linda Foundation. Edward Spencer stood beside the laptop, adjusting the collar of his suit, tapping the clicker in his hand with quiet precision. He looked every bit the seasoned investigator, professional, unfazed, clinical. And Ethan, sitting beside him like a prosecutor awaiting a verdict, looked smug. I could barely feel my legs. Across the table, Mom hadn't touched her dessert. She stared at me not with accusation but something heavier, uncertainty. She didn't know what to believe. "Shall we begin?" Edward asked calmly. But before he could tap the remote, a sharp voice cut through the stillness. "Not yet." Heads turned. Natalie stepped forward from the back of the room. Heels clicking with authority, a brown leather folder clutched under one arm. Her suit was sharp, her presence sharper. "I'm Natalie Ruiz, legal counsel for Mr. Noah Jensen," she said evenly, "and I have a formal request to make before any presentation proceeds." Edward blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me?" She handed him a folded sheet of paper. "This is a cease and desist along with a disclosure request. It outlines several discrepancies we found in your report, including the omission of context, improper sourcing of confidential data, and speculative analysis presented as fact." Ethan stood up abruptly. "What is this? Are you seriously trying to—" Natalie cut him off. "Mr. Jensen, unless you'd like to explain to this entire room how you came into possession of confidential emails related to your mother's fraud case, I suggest you sit down." Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Edward examined the paper in silence. His jaw shifted. Then slowly, with a visible swallow, he set the clicker down. "What are you doing?" Ethan hissed. "We had an agreement." Edward's voice remained level. "My agreement is with the law, and this supersedes any personal contract." Then turning to the crowd, he said, "Due to new information brought forward, I'll be presenting our full unedited findings." He switched the slide. The screen changed from suspicion to truth. Slide 1. Internal email. Subject support for elder fraud claim. Edward read aloud. Noah Jensen assisted Linda Jensen in filing a claim against Midwest Capital Group, the company that defrauded her of over $40,000. Emails show Noah gathering documentation on her behalf, compiling financial records and corresponding with legal aid clinics. There was a pause in the room. Slide 2 appeared screenshots of email exchanges, not shady backdoor dealings, but straightforward, professional, emotionally restrained. Slide 3. Personal bank transfers, labeled as family support. These transactions, Edward continued, show over $28,000 transferred from Mr. Noah Jensen's personal account to Linda Jensen over the course of 18 months. He paused, then added, none of these transactions intersected with the Linda Foundation's donor pool. No misappropriation was detected. Slide 4 followed donation records, timestamps, board approvals. Everything above board. Transparent. My throat tightened. I wasn't vindicated yet, but the floor beneath me stopped shaking. I looked at Mom. Her lips trembled. Her hand hovered over her chest. She glanced at the screen, then at me, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. You never told me. I shook my head. I didn't want you to feel guilty. She blinked rapidly. Ethan, meanwhile, looked like someone watching a building collapse, one he helped build. No, he muttered. That's not... There's more. There's supposed to be more. Edward kept going. Code 5. Program outcomes. The Linda Foundation, founded by Mr. Jensen. Using personal funds, the Linda Foundation has directly supported 17 women and 6 veterans in the last fiscal year. All operations have passed standard audits. Soft murmurs began to ripple across the room. Natalie crossed her arms, quiet but steady. Ethan suddenly lunged forward and grabbed the remote from Edward's hand. This is garbage, he barked. He's hiding something. He's been playing the victim for years. The clicker clattered to the floor. Edward didn't flinch. Our full report has been submitted to council. There's nothing left to show. Mom stood slowly. She was still strong for 60, independent, upright, composed. But her voice came out like a wind pressed through grief. Ethan, she said. Sit down. He turned to her, disbelief written across his face. Mom. Sit down, she repeated. He did. The room was still. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was the sound of truth taking up space and pride quietly shrinking. I exhaled, shoulders heavy. Not because I had won, but because for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer defending myself from shadows. I was finally being seen. The air in the restaurant felt thick, not with tension anymore that had already burst. Now it was something heavier, realization, the kind that settles in your chest like cold rain. On the screen behind Edward, the final slide of the report lingered quietly. Conclusion: no evidence of misconduct. For a moment, no one moved. And then Ethan snapped. He stood, knocking his chair slightly askew, and stormed toward the front of the room. His face was flushed red with a kind of fury that had nowhere left to go. He grabbed the microphone from the podium before Edward could stop him. This is a show, he shouted. All of it. He's been playing the saint for years, but it's all manipulation, a setup. He wanted you to see him as the perfect son. Gasps rippled through the guests. Mom stiffened beside me. Her hands had moved from her lap to the edge of the table as if bracing for impact. Do you really think he did all this out of love? Ethan continued, turning to the crowd like a man unraveling on a stage he never meant to share. He gave you money, Mom. and helped with errands, sure, but why? Because he knew it would look good, because he wanted your attention, your sympathy, your house. The words echoed too loudly, bouncing off the walls and dying in a kind of awful stillness. Edward remained composed. As stated, our report is complete. There is no evidence of fraud, coercion, or intent to mislead. The materials Mr. Jensen submitted were factual, transparent, and corroborated by third-party witnesses. He paused, then added with barely disguised firmness. All allegations provided by Mr. Ethan Jensen relied on assumptions and interpretations unsupported by verifiable data. That's when it happened. Mom let out a sound I hadn't heard before, not a sob, not a gasp, something like the ache of an entire lifetime pressing through her lungs. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. Ethan looked at her stunned. "Mom." She didn't speak. Across the room, I saw Dad rise slowly from his seat. Frank Jensen had never been one for speeches or sentiment, but the expression on his face was unmistakable disappointment, sharp and raw. He didn't yell. He didn't glare. He just looked at Ethan and shook his head once. That silence said more than any lecture ever could. "I didn't want this," Ethan blurted, his voice cracking. I just wanted to know." He turned to Mom, almost pleading now. "I just needed to know who you loved more." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had burned too long, and suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't about fraud or fairness or foundations. This had always been about affection, about a son who spent his whole life collecting trophies only to feel like none of them mattered if he didn't have the one thing he couldn't win: his mother's quiet love. No one clapped. No one moved. Even the servers stood frozen near the back wall, uncertain whether to refill glasses or disappear entirely. I looked at Ethan. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of being compared, tired of being distrusted, tired of carrying a relationship that neither of us had the words to repair. But in that moment, I also saw something else: the boy he used to be. The one who stayed up late editing college essays to impress Dad. The one who checked Mom's blood pressure when she had migraines and pretended not to worry. The one who didn't know how to ask for love, so he reached for control instead. "I never asked to be the favorite," I said quietly from across the room. Ethan turned toward me, eyes wild, breathing hard. I never even knew there was one. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A pause. Then Mom stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily. She walked to the center of the room, still graceful, even with age in her knees and grief in her spine. She placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. "I have loved you," she said softly, "every day of your life. But I won't let that love be a weapon." Ethan's face crumpled. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, he said nothing. The room remained still, not because it was waiting for the next scene, but because there was nothing left to perform, only truth, only pain, and maybe, just maybe, the fragile start of healing. The soft click of the private lounge door closing behind us was louder than anything that had come before it. The restaurant outside was still buzzing with the faint sounds of forks, muffled conversation, and ambient jazz. But here in this quiet side room with its dark wood walls and antique bookshelf, everything felt still. Mom sat first, slowly, deliberately. Her cane leaned against the arm of a leather chair that looked far too heavy for how fragile she seemed. She motioned to the plush love seat across from her. "Sit, both of you." Noah obeyed without hesitation. Ethan hesitated like a soldier awaiting reprimand, but then lowered himself beside his brother, keeping a slight distance between them. No one spoke for a moment. Mom's eyes flicked between them, red-rimmed but steady. "You two want to tear each other apart, and I need to know why." Ethan cleared his throat but said nothing. Noah looked down, hands folded. The silence stretched until Mom said, "Not unkindly, I'm not leaving this room until I understand." That was all it took. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I've spent my whole life trying to be enough," he said quietly. "For you, for Dad, for everyone." Mom blinked. "I got the grades, the scholarships, the promotions, the condo, the wife, the divorce, the bigger condo. I did everything I was supposed to do, everything I thought would make you proud, and every time I turned around, Noah was just there. No fanfare, no expectations, just you, always with you." His voice cracked. "I know it sounds stupid, I know it's petty, but it didn't matter how many raises I got or how many times Dad bragged about my job. I still felt like the one thing I couldn't win was your attention. Like no matter what I did, he got something I didn't." He looked away, jaw trembling. "I'm sorry," he said barely above a whisper. Noah stared at him, stunned. Ethan, I never thought you saw me like that." Ethan scoffed. "What other way is there to see you? You're the golden heart, the quiet hero, the one who stayed, the one who helped Mom. You were always real and I was just a resume." Noah's voice was soft but firm. "I didn't stay to win. I stayed because I was scared Mom wouldn't make it through that mess alone." He paused, searching for words. "And you want to talk about feeling invisible? I used to think I didn't exist unless I was being compared to you." Ethan flinched. Every birthday, every graduation, every holiday, it was, "Ethan did this. Ethan's promotion. Ethan's new car. I'd bring a woman I helped find housing and Mom would smile, but then she'd ask if I was going to get a real job like you. One with benefits. One she could explain to her friends." Noah's voice faltered. "I stayed quiet, because if I spoke up, I'd just sound bitter, or worse, ungrateful." He looked at Mom. "And honestly, I didn't think you saw me that way, Mom. Not the way you saw him." Mom covered her mouth, tears gathering fast. "Oh, boys." She rose slowly and sat down between them on the love seat, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "I have loved you both more than I ever knew how to say. But I see now I said it louder to the one I worried about, and quieter to the one I thought already knew." She turned to Ethan. "I saw how hard you worked, but I also saw how hard you pushed yourself, and I was afraid if I praised you too much, you'd never stop chasing perfection, like it was something you had to earn." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Mom turned to Noah. "And you, I thought you did know. You always made it easy to be proud. You made space for others to shine, even when you had every right to take the light yourself." Her voice broke. "I didn't realize I was leaving you in the dark." She drew them both close, wrapping her arms around her sons. For a moment they stayed that way, awkward, broken soft. Not men in their 30s, just two boys and their mother. "Orchut." After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke again. "I thought he was trying to steal you." Noah gave a small laugh. "I thought you'd never forgive me for being me." Mom smiled sadly. "I never wanted you two to compete. I wanted you to stand together." Ethan leaned back, wiping his eyes. "So, what now?" Noah looked at him, eyes clearer than they'd been all evening. "Now we stop pretending this family is perfect and start building one that's real." Mom reached for their hands. No more secrets, no more measuring, just honesty and grace. For the first time in a long time, it felt like a beginning, not an ending. The party never fully recovered after the private conversation. People tried, plates were cleared, coffee was served, someone even offered an awkward toast about family resilience. But the mood had changed. Laughter was quieter, glances lingered, and yet there was a kind of quiet peace that had replaced the tension. Ethan returned to the dining room just before dessert ended. His eyes were still red, his tie loosened, but he looked different. Not broken, not defeated, just real. He tapped his glass lightly with a fork. This time the room fell silent without hesitation. "I owe you all an apology," he said. His voice was steadier than it had been during the outburst, not because the emotions had faded, but because he was finally speaking from somewhere deeper than pride. "I let jealousy guide me. I made assumptions. I believed things about my brother that weren't true, and I tried to prove them in the worst possible way." He looked toward Noah. "I'm sorry." Noah nodded once, no grand gesture, no heroics. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. Ethan took a breath. "I'm stepping back for a while. I've taken a leave from work. I'm heading to Austin for a few months. No plan, just some space to figure out who I am when I'm not chasing a title." A few guests murmured quietly. A cousin offered a nod. Someone clapped softly, respectfully. And then it was over. No fireworks, no standing ovation, just a man choosing change. 2 weeks later, the days at the nonprofit settled into their usual rhythm. Noah returned to the office, the mural of community faces on the hallway still faded at the edges, the coffee still too strong, and the energy still real. He wasn't the same, though, somehow lighter, more grounded. Mom stopped by the center on Thursdays, sorting clothing donations or chatting with the women over tea. She always brought pastries, the good kind, from the Polish bakery near downtown. Dad even came once, uncomfortable at first, but quietly helping a veteran fix a broken cabinet in one of the shelters. On a windy afternoon, as Noah walked Mom out to her car, Dad lingered behind until suddenly he stepped forward and pulled Noah into a firm, unexpected hug. Noah froze, then hugged back. When they pulled apart, Frank Jensen, usually gruff, guarded, looked his son squarely in the eye and said, "You're the reason your mother still smiles." Then he clapped him once on the shoulder and walked off as if he hadn't just said the most vulnerable thing of his life. Noah stood there for a long time watching his parents drive away. The wind pressed cold against his cheeks, but inside, something warm had settled. Weeks passed. The headlines moved on. The family group chat came alive again, this time with less performative success, more check-ins, more honesty. Ethan's name showed up here and there, photos of food trucks in Austin. Blurry snapshots of sunsets, one picture of a dog he was considering adopting. Noah didn't reply to all of them. He only smiled when he saw them. Then he opened his inbox and saw a note. Subject: first time I've breathed in years. From Ethan Jensen, Noah just wanted to say thank you. Not for letting me off the hook, but for not letting me drown in my own lies. Austin's weird in a good way. No one here cares what I do for work. I haven't worn a blazer in 10 days and no one's died. I've started journaling, hiking, volunteering at a food pantry. Don't laugh. It's the first time I've done something that isn't for a promotion. For the first time in a long time. I feel like I'm living. Not proving, and that's because of you. Love, Ethan. Noah reread it twice, then closed his laptop and exhaled. There was no magical reunion, no perfect bow tied at the end of the story, just two brothers walking slowly, imperfectly back toward each other. But it was real, and that was enough.